Recently, I decided that I wanted to build a PC. I wanted it to be able to play all of the latest games at ultra settings, stream, record, the whole deal. Then, I realized that a GPU capable of all of that would cost me about the same as a down payment on a car. Seriously, why is the 4090 so expensive? I know it's an amazing card, and all that, but really, $2,000. So I began to do some research. And happily I discovered that there can be a lot of performance had for a fraction of the price if you're willing to compromise resolution to 1440p, or especially down to 1080p. I already had a pretty nice 1080p FreeSync monitor that I got for my Xbox, so I decided to go for a build that would fully max out this display, with potential to move up to 1440p in the future. So from there, I tried to find what was considered the best budget GPU, if you can even call $300 plus budget. What happened to $100 cards? What I found was a ton of divisiveness. Tons of people are NVIDIA or nothing brothers that will post super long comments about how the features present on NVIDIA GPUs are just far superior to anything else on the market. Seriously, they will mention stuff that you have never heard of and that I'm still convinced nobody actually uses. NVIDIA Freestyle? Really? Then on the other side of things, you got the Team Red brothers who seem incapable of looking at anything other than frames per dollar, and will always say that AMD GPUs are better because of raw performance. And the funny thing about this is that both of these people are, usually, technically correct. How is that possible? Unless we're talking about the 4090, AMD cards almost always offer more performance for the price when compared to their NVIDIA counterpart. Then, NVIDIA has DLSS, frame gen, reflex, CUDA, and far more advanced ray tracing technology. So you can see where the divisiveness, and inevitably, a bit of confusion begins. But I'm here to tell you, it's really not that serious. I ended up trying both AMD and NVIDIA with a similar tiered card from each, and I think they both have positives and negatives, none of which have to do with the actual performance in most games. More on that later. When it comes to that, both cards I tried offered fantastic experiences at both 1080p and 1440p. The biggest differences between them in my experience were power consumption, heat generation, and ease of tuning general use. Everything else I tried to do, including video editing, animation, etc., was all effectively the same. NVIDIA definitely does have an advantage if you're a serious animator or video editor, as CUDA is very powerful. But for most people I feel AMD will suffice. There was not a single game or piece of software I encountered that wouldn't run on AMD or NVIDIA. Both seem to have good driver support for all of the newest games and programs. Now getting into the actual review, the Power Color Fighter. This thing went above and beyond what I expected out of it, especially considering the price at $320 US. As a comparison, the NVIDIA card I have access to is an ASUS Dual 3060Ti, which cost me $410 US. I will acknowledge, however, that the 3060Ti has come down in price since I've purchased it. However, it is still usually more expensive than the 6700 XT from what I can find, somewhere around the $360 US mark. So both of these cards are a 2-fan model recommended for a 650W PSU, both costing around $350 adjusted for today's market. So I feel this is a pretty fair comparison, as someone building a PC in the $700 to $1,000 range would most likely be weighing these two as potential options. I also want to mention that I won't be considering the used market, as I and many others aren't willing to take that kind of gamble on something so expensive. For me personally, new was the only option. Now that that's out of the way, and you have some reference of what I'll be comparing it to where I'm coming from, let's start with looking at the features of the 6700 XT. So what exactly are you getting for that $320? The main advantage is a respectable 12 GB of VRAM, and I found this to be huge for any recent games. I experienced that due to this alone, this card tends to handle ultra textures and ultra settings in general a lot better than the 3060Ti does, providing much more stable frame rates on games like Returnal or Resident Evil 4. While the averages were very similar, I found the 1% lows on the 6700 XT to be much higher, and stutter was almost non-existent, which really made a huge difference in how smooth the game felt. This has made me feel very strongly towards siding with the 6700 XT at the moment, as the experience I've gotten with this card has been by far the best PC gaming experience I've ever had. It should be noted that this is really only applicable for recent games, such as Returnal or Hogwarts Legacy. For any older titles, 2021 or before, performance was effectively the same. Beyond the game performance, the experience of setting it up and dialing in an overclock undervolt was genuinely fun, as it felt AMD actually wanted me to do this to the card. All of the options were right there in the driver software, with an option to auto overclock or auto undervolt also present. Seriously awesome, makes the tinkering side of things way more accessible, and I think that side of things is one of the whole reasons you would be on PC in the first place. Whereas on the NVIDIA side, you have to either go into the BIOS or download a separate program to even start looking at tuning. And then once you actually get there, you have to fully understand what you're doing, as there are no auto overclock or basic tuning options available. Get ready to watch some YouTube tutorials. For what it's worth, Afterburner is a great piece of software, but my point still stands, you'd have to actually look for that yourself, and know what it is. With the AMD alternative you might not even know what undervolting is, but see it as an option when you're looking through the tabs, and start experimenting. That's actually what happened to me, and what inspired me to make this comparison in the first place. It's not all positive however, there were a couple of things I did find that I missed, number one being DLSS. That feature really is nice, there is no arguing it. And while FSR can look good when implemented properly, Returnal, I think uses it pretty nicely. More often than not it looks very blurry, not something I would want to use. Thankfully it's not usually needed at my current resolution, but when it comes to some next-gen features like ray tracing, I think it could be pretty nice. That is the other area where the 3060 Ti does beat this card, and it smashes it. RT performance here is really quite bad. Anything beyond medium, for the most part, is completely unplayable, tanking down as low as 25 frames per second in games like Hogwarts Legacy, a game that manages to push over 100 frames without root. While the performance hit is also there on the NVIDIA side, it is nowhere near that substantial, more like from high 90s to low 60s, high 50s, and is usually still playable. Beyond that, the ray tracing itself just looks worse on AMD cards to my eye, it seems to be rendered differently, often having a lot of noise and extra pixels that just look kinda gross. As a result I tend to just leave RT off, and in the current landscape of gaming, I don't feel like I'm really missing out on much. RT still feels like it's in a very primitive stage at the moment, with only top-end graphics cards still being able to push high frame rates with it on. But it is still a point that I feel should be made, as some will really want to make sure they can experience ray tracing, and I do think that if that is you, you'd probably have a better experience on Team Green. I also think you'd probably want to consider moving up a tier in card, going for at least a 30-40-70, but that's besides the point. Even just comparing these two, the 3060 Ti will ray trace better than the 6700 XT. There's one more thing that I haven't talked about, and that's power consumption and heat. Out of the box, the NVIDIA card runs significantly hotter while both draw the same amount of power. Average temps on the 3060 Ti are 84°C, whereas average on the 6700 XT is 74°C, while both drawing a peak of ~220W. With an undervolt applied, things get even better on the AMD side, peaking at 180W power draw and 68°C. With the NVIDIA card, I was never able to get an undervolt working that actually reduced my power consumption by a significant amount. I couldn't get it to go under 200W, therefore the temp remained relatively high, stabilizing at a max of 83°C. I will admit, this is absolutely on me, as I just don't know how to undervolt this thing properly. I've tried recommended curves, it just never makes a difference. I think I need to change some setting in my BIOS or something, not entirely sure, and I have spent several hours trying to work this out so far. I will update this review if I manage to figure out a setting that makes a notable change. But I do think this says quite a bit about the user-friendliness of the AMD Adrenalin software. Within minutes I had a stable undervolt applied, without watching any tutorials, and was seeing noticeable differences in performance. For that I think AMD gets a huge W. It also goes to be said that out of the box neither card truly needs this done to it, but given how hot they tend to get, it is definitely something a lot of people will want to do, if for no other reason than to let their air conditioner relax a bit. Seriously, these things put off some heat. You could probably heat an entire house with an overclocked GPU. So what's the verdict? I know I went off on some tangents here, but I think the overall message was that the AMD card offered a really great experience in terms of performance and tuning, and for the price is really hard to beat. I didn't experience any of the so-called driver issues that people complain about, and the only area where performance is actually better on NVIDIA is with ray tracing on. So if you're looking to build a PC, maybe consider going with AMD. There's a lot of good to be had for what are usually really affordable prices when compared with the competition. That being said, these are both just massive corporations that don't even care if their product is actually competitive. See RTX 4060 Ti at $500 and RX 7800 leaked at $800. So at the end of the day, I think all you should really care about is which one is cheaper. If after I make this, tomorrow the 3060 Ti becomes $250, I would say that is absolutely the better card for the money. Point is, don't go down the rabbit hole of thinking that one brand is just better, because that's how they get you to spend way too much on a card that isn't even that much different.